On April 15, 1968, the Mets and the Astros played for 24 innings, 6 hours and 6 minutes, and for 23 and a half scoreless innings before Houston finally won 1-0 at the Astrodome. There were 158 at-bats, only 22 hits. And by the end of the night, it had become less of a baseball game and more a test of endurance, metabolism, and spite. Some games are memorable because somebody gets 3 home runs. Sometimes they're memorable because an ace throws a shutout. Then there are games like this one, where the story stops belonging to ordinary baseball and starts belonging to time itself. And in the middle of all that sits Jim Ray, not Tom Seaver, not Don Wilson, not Gil Hodges, not some Cooperstown monument. Jim Ray, a 23-year-old reliever, enters in the 14th inning of a scoreless tie and throws 7 shutout innings, allows 2 hits, walks 1, strikes out 11. In a game that kept refusing resolution, Jim Ray became the selection of the night where Houston stayed alive. Welcome back to Astros 100. I'm documenting 1 game per player until I reach 100. This is Astros 09. The player is Jim Ray, and the game is April 15th, 1968. New York Mets, Houston Astros. Houston wins 1-0 in 24 innings. Today's idea is this. Sometimes the most important man in the game is not the all-star who starts it, but the reliever who keeps it from dying. This is not a game about glamour. It's a game about accumulation, about outs, piling on outs, until fatigue becomes part of the box score. And because it's a Jim Ray game, the center of gravity is not the famous name at the front end of the night. It's the young arm in the middle of the marathon that made sure Houston still had a chance when everybody else had stopped imagining a happy ending. The Mets arrive in Houston at 2-2. The Astros are 4-1, and for the moment, one of the best-looking clubs in the National League. That sounds funny in retrospect because we know where these seasons finish. The Astros again finished 72-90, dead last in the 10-team National League, with Grady Hatton replaced during the season by Harry Walker. The Mets would finish 73-89, just 1 game back in the loss column, but their season mattered differently. 1968 was the first year of the Gil Hodges era, the hard, stern, adult bridge between the old lovable loser Mets and the 1969 miracle that would follow. So this is one of those early season games where the standings lie a little and tell the truth a little. Houston is genuinely pitching well. New York is genuinely trying to become more professional. Both teams are still learning what they are. The Astros are trying to prove that their best arms can drag the club upward. The Mets are trying to prove Hodges can impose order on a franchise that has spent much of its life as a punchline. And that's why this game matters beyond novelty. If it were just 24 innings, it would already be historic. But it's 24 innings played by 2 expansion-era clubs still trying to become legitimate, still trying to convince the sport that they're more than colorful furniture. The week around this game sits in one of the strangest and heaviest openings in baseball history. The 1968 season had been delayed by 2 days after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., an unprecedented major league response to national mourning. Baseball opened on April 10th, not April 8th, and everything in the sport was being played inside a country that felt unsteady, angry, and raw. Once the season did start, it started in what would become the most famous pitcher's year of the modern game. This was the opening week of what history would later call the year of the pitcher, the season of Bob Gibson's 1.12 ERA, Denny McLain's 31 victories, and a broader run-scoring collapse so severe that baseball would lower the mound after the season. The game we're looking at is not an exception to 1968. It's 1968 distilled down to one long, airless tube. Too few runs, too much pitching, too much frustration, and the constant sense that hitters are working with defective equipment. People sometimes flatten this game into the longest game ever. Not quite right. At the time, it tied the longest game to a decision at 24 innings. But what made it unique was the combination. Longest night game to that point, and longest game to begin with 23 scoreless innings before anybody finally broke through. That distinction matters. The weirdness here is not just the length, it's the purity of the deadlock. For the Mets, the manager is Gil Hodges. By 1968, he's already a baseball statesman, a Brooklyn Dodgers star, a war vet, and a man Tom Seaver later said was the most important figure in his career. Saber's biography presents Hodges as a gentle giant with immense authority, the kind of man who did not need to scream to dominate a room. In April 1968, he's brand new in Queens, trying to instill discipline on a franchise that had mostly lived without it. For Houston, it's Grady Hatton. Hatton was born in Beaumont, Texas. He went to the University of Texas where he starred. He's always been praised for his integrity and baseball steadiness. Saber notes he led the Astros from 1966 through June of 1968. Hatton is not remembered with the same mythic weight as Hodges, but he matters here because this Astros club still has his fingerprints all over it. Sharp, pitching-oriented, and trying to look more organized than its talent base will allow. The starting pitchers are the obvious marquee names. Tom Seaver, 23-year-old right-hander from Fresno, California. He's already the Mets' crown jewel. Saber describes him as a thinking man's pitcher, even in high school. By the time he arrived in Houston for this game, he was coming off a brilliant rookie year that had made him the franchise's first true pitching star. He's not yet Tom Terrific in the full national sense, but the outline's already there. Across from him is Don Wilson, born in Monroe, Louisiana, raised in Compton, California, and signed by Houston after junior college. He's one of the hardest throwers in the league. Saber's Wilson biography describes the live arm, the competitive fire, and the early conversion from infield prospect to pitcher. Less than a year earlier, Wilson had thrown the first no-hitter in Astrodome history. So the top of this game is not a mismatch, and it's not a placeholder. It's not a stall for the relievers. It's two young power arms starting a duel that the bullpen will inherit and distort into folklore. There's not many Hall of Fame bats in the actual starting lineups, which is part of what gives this game its particular flavor. The Cooperstown presence comes from Gil Hodges in the dugout and Tom Seaver on the mound, not from a lineup loaded with bronze plaque names. That's important. This is not the Yankees-Dodgers. This is a game full of players who are historically meaningful in different ways. For the Mets, you have names that will soon become part of the 1965 mythology. Tommy A.G., Ron Swoboda, Cleon Jones, Jerry Grote, Ed Kranepool, Al Weiss. For Houston, you have Rusty Staub and Jimmy Wynn, two of the most important early franchise figures, plus a cast that features Bob Aspromonte, Norm Miller, Julio Gote, and Hector Torres. So this is not a Hall of Fame lineup game. It's a franchise memory game, a folklore game, a game where the meaning of the names depends on whether you care about Houston or New York enough to remember the strange old roads before either club really arrived. Then there's the most compelling matchup of all, Seaver versus Wilson, two young right-handers whose power stuff made the scoreboard field optional. There's no evidence of some bitter personal blood feud rivalry coming into this one. What exists is a structural kinship. These are both 1962 expansion clubs, both still young, both still unstable, both still trying to define what competence looks like. They're not mortal enemies. They're more like cousins who grew up in different houses and keep meeting at awkward family functions. The series history before this night had already bounced around. The historical series showed Houston hammering New York 13-5 in 1963 and 14-4 in 1965. 1964 was split 9-9, and the Mets took 1966 by an 11-7 margin. Houston answered in 1967 by the same 11-7 margin. So the relationship was not yet a rivalry in the emotional sense, but it was old enough to have a pattern, long stretches where one young, uneven club took liberties with the other. And there's one gorgeous thread running right through the middle of this episode. Jim Ray himself had briefly belonged to the Mets. Baseball Almanac's transactions record shows Houston sold him to New York in February 1967, then got him back a month later. So the focus player here is, technically, a former Met who never really became a Met at all. That's the kind of baseball detail I love because it's just crooked enough to be perfect. Jim Ray's not a real ex-Met in the emotional sense, but on paper he is. He crossed their border, and then he crossed back. Now he's the one strangling them in the 14th through 20th innings. Baseball's full of these almost connections, these bureaucratic little wormholes that later look like destiny. The challenge with Jim Ray is that the public record is much thinner than it is for Seaver or Hodges. Saber does not yet have a full written narrative biography for him. What it does have are the key essentials. James Francis Ray, born December 1, 1944, in Rock Hill, South Carolina. He died May 26, 2005, in Margate, Florida. Baseball Reference identifies him as a right-handed pitcher, and MLB's player page lists his nickname, Sting. Other reference sources fill in the blanks. Ray attended Holly High School in Michigan. He signed with the Baltimore Orioles in 1963, then was selected by the Houston Colt 45s in the first-year minor league draft in December of that year. He reached the majors with Houston on September 16, 1965, at the age of 20. He's one of those classic mid-60s young power relievers, live arm, incomplete profile, no guarantee of permanence. By the time this game arrives, Ray is still trying to become something more than organizational depth with velocity. He'd appeared in the majors in 1965 and 1966, then spent 1967 out of Major League Ball. He's back in 1968 as part of a Houston pitching machine that is deep in arms, but still sorting status out. He's not the headline. He's not the face on the poster. What he is the kind of pitcher good old clubs often discover by necessity, a hard thrower who can cover chaos. And that makes him a beautiful subject for this project, because the Astros were built in part by men like this, not only by the stars, but by the later icons, by relievers and utility men and almost forgotten arms who on a given night were the whole architecture of the team. This game mattered to Jim Ray because it gave him something better than a save or a win total. It gave him identity. In the box score, Wade Blasingame gets the win. In memory, though, the game belongs just as much to Ray as it does to anybody. He enters a scoreless tie in the 14th, works 7 innings, allows no hits, walks 1, strikes out 11. For 1/3 of a full game, he becomes the hinge on which the entire night swings. That matters because relievers often disappear to the punctuation of baseball history. A starter begins the sentence, and a hitter ends it. The guy in the middle, forgotten. Jim Ray was the middle here. In the middle, sometimes it's the point. This is the sort of performance that tells a manager, this arm can be trusted with a situation that no longer resembles baseball. The game begins at 7:31 p.m. in the Astrodome, 66 degrees inside, 14,219 paying customers in the building, plus 5,000 Boy Scouts, admitted free. That last detail matters because by the end of the night, the dome feels less like a ballpark and more like a social experiment. The opening inning is clean on both sides. Don Wilson retires Weiss, Boswell, Agee. Tom Seaver retires Davis, Miller, Wynn. The pitchers immediately announce runs will have to be smuggled in. The first meaningful crack comes in the second. The Mets get a harmless 2-out single from Ed Kranepool in the top half. In the bottom half, Houston creates the best chance either club will have for a very long time. Hal King doubles, and a wild pitch moves into third. Then Bob Aspromonte hits a sharp grounder to second. Ken Boswell throws it home, and Jerry Grote hangs on through King's collision at the plate. It's a huge play. In hindsight, it feels supernatural, like the game warning both teams. If they want to run tonight, they're going to have to suffer for it. The Mets threaten in the third when Alois walks and Boswell reaches after a 2-strike wild pitch. But Tommy Agee flies out. In the fourth, Art Shamsky singles and reaches second on Wilson's throwing error, then goes nowhere. In the fifth, Seaver himself singles. In the seventh, Kranepool singles, gets sacrificed to second, but none of it turns into a run. Wilson works 9 scoreless innings, allows 5 hits, walks 3, throws 2 wild pitches, and keeps New York from ever touching third. Seaver's even stingier. After King's second inning double, he retires Houston in order from the third through the 9th. He goes 10 innings, allows 2 hits, walks none, strikes out 3. That line's funny because it does not look like the line of a dominance god, but that is exactly what it was. Fast, controlled, efficient, almost cruelly uneventful. The Astros do not put their second hit on the board until Rusty Staub singles with 2 outs in the 10th. Seaver strands him and leaves with one of the strangest no decisions of his life. Then the bullpens take over and the game changes texture. John Buzzhart gives Houston 2 clean innings. Ron Taylor answers for New York. In the 12th, the Mets finally create a real disaster. Grote singles, Weiss singles, Boswell singles. The bases are loaded for AG. He grounds out, and that one hurts, because in a game like this, you do not get many bases loaded innings. New York wastes it. The Journal account after the game would note that AG and Ron Swoboda, the Mets' third and fourth hitters, went a combined over 20 with 9 strikeouts. That's not a slump. It's structural failure. Houston has its own almost moment in the bottom of the 13th. Julio Gaute singles, Hector Torres walks, Hatton goes to Dick Selma with 2 out and gets nothing from the matchup. This is where Jim Ray enters the night, and in the top of the 14th, and from the second he appears, the rhythm changes. He retires the Mets in order in the 14th. He does it again in the 15th. He does it again in the 16th. That's 3 perfect innings, dropped into the dead center of a game already wobbling under its own length. In the bottom of the 16th, Houston gives him a chance. Torres lays down a bunt single. Ray comes up to bunt him over, and this produces one of the best weird tactical moments of the night. Gil Hodges, the old Brooklyn Fox that he is, brings Ron Swoboda in from right field, hands him a first baseman's mitt. Ed Kranepool moves in to attack the bunt. The defense contorts itself into a temporary infield machine built for one play. Ray strikes out anyway. It's a wonderful image. Old baseball ingenuity deployed at midnight something in the morning. Everyone's exhausted. Everyone's still pretending. This is a normal sport. The top of the 17th is Ray's first real crisis. Ed Charles doubles. A squeeze attempt fails when Bud Harrelson, batting for Al Jackson, strikes out. Weiss grounds out. Crisis over. In the 18th, Ray strikes out the side. In the 19th, Cleon Jones singles. Kranepool bunts him over. Ray intentionally walks Charles, and then the Mets pull off a double steal during Grote's strikeout, putting runners at second and third with 2 out. Hodges, running out of bodies, lets Denny Frizzlehout hit for himself. Ray strikes him out too, and that might be the single cleanest picture of this episode. The game is trying to break, and Jim Ray keeps saying, no. Meanwhile, the scoreboard starts to lose its mind. The Sabre Game story presents some of the best fanagram material. The jokes about how the crowd now effectively is watching a third game, the announcement of the longest scoreless night game in Major League history, and the invitation to a 21st inning stretch. Beer sales stop at midnight because Texas law requires it. The remaining crowd gets punchy. Rusty Staub later said that after about the 17th, everything got funny. And that sounds right. Once a game passes 4 hours and still has no score, humor becomes a survival tool. Every retelling of this game wants a sprint to the Al Weiss era, because errors are easy, and famous pitchers are easy, and weird records are easy. But the thing that bothers me is how often that skips the hardest part of the story. The fact that Jim Ray walked into a scoreless tie in the 14th inning and essentially threw a starter's outing inside extra innings. That's not garnish, that is the spine. Ray's night ended after the 20th, and Wade Blasingame takes over in the 21st. Blasingame is not nearly as dramatic, but he is efficient. The Mets threaten in the 22nd, and when Grote singles and reaches second on Don Cardwell's sacrifice, Houston survives. In the bottom of the 22nd, New York turns to rookie Les Rohr, who arrives having already thrown 25 minutes of batting practice before the game, which feels illegal even by 1968 standards. Rohr is shaky. He walks a wild pitch, an intentional pass, another intentional pass. Houston gets stopped to third and still cannot score because Rohr strikes out Gaute. The game remains tied, and by the 23rd inning, Houston officials announce the press will be given breakfast. Yeah! Then the 24th, Norm Miller singles to right. Rohr balks. Not one of those wild theatrical balks, just the deadly little breaking the hands violation that moves Miller to second. Jim Wynn is walked intentionally. Staub grounds out, advancing both men. With 1 out, John Bateman is also walked intentionally to load the bases. That brings up Bob Aspromonte, who is 0 for 8 and dragging his own exhaustion to the plate. He hits a grounder right at Al Weiss, and then the whole game tilts. The ball goes through Weiss's legs. Miller scores. Houston wins. Aspromonte gets the RBI. Weiss gets the error, and everyone gets to go home. When it ends, the final shape is almost elegant in its stupidity. Mets 0, Astros 1. 24 innings. 11 hits each. 16 left on base each. 1 error each. And a result that looks tiny, only when you realize how much human time had to be spent manufacturing that one single solitary run. For Houston, the win meant two things at once. First, the immediate thing. They moved to 5-1. Sabre Journal notes they're actually in first place after this game. Second, the more revealing thing, this club could pitch with anybody. Wilson, Buzzhart, Combs, Ray Blasingame. 5 Astros pitchers combined for 24 shutout innings and 20 strikeouts. That's a franchise flex, even if the offense required an error in the 24th inning to win. For the Mets, it meant something harsher. It reinforced the old national suspicion that New York had still not hit enough to matter. Arthur Daly of the New York Times went right at that point after this game. In truth, the numbers support the insult. Agee and Sabota, the middle of the order muscle, vanished. The Mets loaded the bases in the 12th and in the 17th and in the 19th, and they got nothing. In a season famous for pitching, New York still find a way to make the story about its bats. This is one of those nights where the post-game presser is really just a collection of next-day newspaper voices, rather than a modern podium and microphone scene. Tom Seaver said his arm still felt lively in the 10th, but acknowledged there's no need to overstrain it. Gil Hodges said long games can be murder. Grady Hatton, in maybe the best line of the aftermath, said there were some sick-sounding bats in the game, which is exactly right. The emotional center of the New York side is Al Weiss. He did not blame the turf. He did not blame the hop. He admitted he blew it, and that honesty is part of why this play lingers. Hodges was way forgiving, suggesting the turf may have influenced the skid, but Weiss owned the failure. Meanwhile, the surrounding absurdity kept going. Breakfast for the press, exhausted catchers, a team flight to New York, looming almost immediately afterward. It was less a post-game than a release of custody. And notably, the accessible newspaper-based accounts do not preserve some grand Jim Ray victory speech. And that feels right. His work was done in the game itself. Houston did not turn this into a miracle. The Astros finished 72-90, which tied a franchise high for wins at that point, but still left them last in the 10-team National League. Baseball Reference note this was the first time the franchise finished in last place, so this night was not the start of a pennant push. It was more like the purest expression of what 1968 Houston could do well: pitch, endure, and sometimes still leave oneself one run short of dignity. The Mets finished 73-89, only marginally better, but their year reads differently in retrospect because it sits directly beneath 1969 like a foundation stone. The club is still bad, but it was no longer shapeless. Hodges was imposing order. Seaver was already elite. Several of the men on the field in this 24-inning loss would be standing in the center of baseball a year later. That is part of what makes this game so eerie. You're watching the Miracle Mets before the miracle, still trapped in its old habits. Jim Ray's 1968 season finished as a strong one: 41 games, 2.67 ERA, 71 strikeouts, mostly in relief. This game was not an isolated hallucination. It was the loudest single proof that Ray could be useful for a full Major League staff. His best Major League season came later, in 1971, when reference sources summarize him as 10-4 with 3 saves and a 2.12 ERA for Houston. He eventually pitched parts of 9 big league seasons, mostly for the Astros and then briefly for Detroit, finishing with 43-30 record, 3.61 all-time earned run average, and 25 saves in 308 appearances. He was traded from Houston to Detroit at the 1973 winter meetings. Then the public trail goes thin again, which is fitting for a pitcher like this. The stars, they stay brightly lit. Men like Jim Ray drift into the side rooms of baseball memory. He dies in 2005 in Margate, Florida, The record keeps his innings. Projects like this are what keep the night itself. Next time, it's Astros 10, Rusty Staub. Tonight was a game of starvation. 1 run in 24 innings. Everybody's waiting for a mistake. Rusty Staub gives you a different flavor of early Astros history. More presence, more identity, more of that first real sense that Houston had a player who could look like a star, even when the franchise still felt unfinished. Well, that's Astros 09 Jim Ray, April 15th, 1968. The box score says he did not get the win. The history says he may have been the most important Astro in the game. 7 innings, 2 hits, 1 walk, 11 strikeouts, and most importantly, no collapse. He kept the night standing long enough for Houston to finally end it. In a marathon famous for its ending, Jim Ray's the reason there was for an ending to have. That's it for now. Let's get into what we're coming up to here. Jim Ray was number 98. Can you see it? And tomorrow, we got Rusty Staub, number 10. So, y'all, thanks for tuning in. I see that I have 0 views, and that's okay. Maybe you'll find this later. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm doing this for myself. It's really fun. I love the Houston Astros, and I love baseball, and I love football, and hockey, and basketball. This channel is going to do the top 100 players of all 124 franchises in the Big Four sports history. I'm starting with Houston because I'm very familiar with them. And we'll keep what's up next a surprise. All right? Thanks for watching. Have a good day.